Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook. You can support me on Local, Subscribestar, and buy me a coffee. And also don't forget to check out my Substack. So we have Cyber Ninja Zero and Minoan in the chat. Hello. So today's conversation. Why am I talking about this? Well, firstly, it's been my channel. I've been talking a lot about, of course, the machine and the problem with the economy and how it warps our perspectives and our incentives. But I'm more concerned at the moment about people that know what's missing, right? These are quote our people that are woke, that know that we need to return to tradition, that know that we need to return to community, that know that we need these things. At least they say they do, right? They say they want community. They say they want some authentic religious expression, some family life. But then you look at them and they're not doing anything to get there, right? Like maybe they themselves have got there, like the older generation, but they're not helping anybody else get there. They're giving advice that doesn't work. They're operating on tropes that don't work, and then they left scratching their head why their kids or their grandkids haven't got started yet. Or they'll say, yeah, we need an alternative. It would be nice to have a community in which you don't have to interface with technology on a daily basis. But nobody is actually going to make that happen. Now, I don't think these people are dishonest. I don't think these people are bad, malevolent actors. So then the question is, well, why? How can they see what's missing? How can they see what needs to be done, but then not do it? Now, they'll spend a lot of time doing things that don't work, that don't actually lead to the goal that you want, even their own stated goal. So I started to think about that. Like, why is this? Why might this be? Well, I think part of it is they don't. Let's step back. Let's talk about action, right? If you are going to act in any way that helps you achieve a desired goal, what are the preconditions you have to have? Well, you have to have knowledge of your environment. You have to know under what conditions and circumstances you are to act, and then tailor your actions accordingly. You need to have capacity. You need to have the ability to act. You need to have a goal in mind, and then you need to look at your capacities and the environment that you're in and determine how those create, costs or limit you or how they affect you so that you can then strive for that goal. So using this as a rubric, what we see is many people just don't know what the environment is they're working in, right? So the United States, the sort of culture war meta, the cultural meta, is just completely a fairy tale, right? What actually is important, what we actually think moves society, doesn't, right? So we'll go back to my favorite whipping boys, the libertarians and Moldbug. It's like, oh, well, if it just weren't for these academics, these blue state Democrat academics and New Dealers and all this blah, 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 we wouldn't have all of this crap, all these pink-haired lesbians and trannies and everything else. It's like, well, they're not the ones causing this. It's the corporations causing this. They've been causing it since the 50s. So the 40s, rather. But we can't say that. And because we can't say that, we don't actually... See, we know the actual academics don't have power. In 2020, if you were not in lockstep with the government, it doesn't matter how well you did academically. You could be a world-renowned doctor. Didn't matter. You're out. Gone. So these people clearly don't have the power that... Or like how the transgender movement has supplanted the TERFs, right? These radical feminists. You're out now. You're obsolete. You don't serve our interests anymore. So clearly, they looked intimidating. They looked imposing, but the power that they had wasn't theirs. It was the power that was loaned to them. But again, we can't say that, right? The environment is just, if you want to look at the left, you could say, well, everything would be this, rainbow utopia if it weren't just for these like reactionary religious zealots and white men and so on and so on. It's just patently absurd, right? I mean, almost all middle management now has been gutted of white men on purpose. And so we're looking at symptoms of the cause of the things we dislike, and then claiming that those symptoms are the causal explanation for why it's here. It's not. It's not. It's just not. And back to the group, back to the audience, our audience, those on the right. It's the corporation, stupid. That's literally what's doing all this, but we can't talk about that. So that one aspect of the environment is just completely being left out for ideological reasons. So any sort of coherent action is impossible. And then the other thing is capacity. These people have an elevated sense of their own capacity. They can't actually do what they think they do. Well, I mean, I've been seeing these people for the last 20 years. They keep on saying they're going to do something and they never do it. They spend a lot of effort spinning their wheels doing something, but it never brings them closer to the stated goals that they have. This is something that academic aging has got at with declared versus revealed preferences. That's part of what's going on. But I think the real issue that's going on, and this is what I think is going to help explain why otherwise well-meaning people can't get the results they want. They are locked in a mental prison that prevents them from seeing just those kinds of actions and activities that they would need to take in order to achieve any meaningful improvement. So this sort of ties into my idea that I've mentioned before, where we want to hide from the eye of Sauron so that the establishment, system, the regime, whatever you want to call it, doesn't actually see us. So there was, let's use an obvious example, the Soviet Union, materialistic, atheist, totalitarian state. There are just certain things they claimed didn't exist, like anything to do with the supernatural and religious. So if you were motivated by those principles, you were sort of unable to be accounted for, right? You couldn't be accounted for in that system. And so it gave you kind of an advantage to work in the shadows. So, but the problem is, we growing up in the modern West have basically been conditioned to think that a whole bunch of things don't exist that actually do exist. And if we knew that, now we can see when they're missing and that it's a problem. Okay, sure. Yeah, true. That's a problem. It's missing. But many don't know why necessarily that's a problem, or if they can't articulate why it's a problem in some sort of specified detail, they then can't get there. And so there's two basic concepts that are delimiting it. One is in economic, which is about price, and the other is technology, which is about measurement. So Carlyle comes up with the idea of the cash nexus, which basically means that cash becomes a medium overlay for all human social interactions. What this has the effect of doing is any social interaction that can't be affixed with a price in the market practically doesn't exist. It goes away. It just doesn't exist because the market doesn't have a way of accounting for it. And because the market doesn't have a way of accounting for it, and because America is an oligarchy run by Wall Street, it just goes unproduced, right? This is where a concept of capitalist realism comes in. This was by Mark Fisher, a book by that name. He argues that it's easier to envision the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. The idea being that the triumph of capitalism was inevitable. There was no other course to take. Capitalism, there's no post-capitalist anything. The world will just end, I guess. And so it creates this. It imposes this reality on us by claiming that it's inevitable and it's a necessary, unchanging fixture of life. And what that ends up doing is it orients everything around the market and exchange, and anything that the market and exchange doesn't account for doesn't go accounted for. So first of all, there are things that didn't used to be considered market goods that are now. So childcare, right? Daycare. Well, 200 years ago, daycare was the women of the community who stayed at home and took care of the kids. That was daycare. And then the men went out and did the work out of the house. But now that's been commodified. Now it's a commodity, and you can exchange it for other commodities. And so, compared to being raised by your family and your kin, this sucks. This is a terrible way of raising kids. And we've seen this for the last 60 years. It just doesn't work. But it was taken out of the sphere because when it was a part of an integrated family community system, the market didn't have a way of accounting for it. And since the cash nexus is driving us all to interact with each other on some sort of cash exchange value, that was what was taken out. Other things that couldn't be accounted for just disappeared, like friendship, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. Riffing off Mark Fisher's idea, I've come up with an adjacent concept called technological realism. And what technological realism entails is it's impossible to imagine that the triumph of technology was anything other than inevitable. It is impossible to imagine a future in which technology does not exist or in a state subordinate to some other goal. It is impossible to imagine non-technical solutions to technical problems. It is impossible to admit the law of diminishing returns applies to technology, right? Technology is inevitable. Technology just is. It's just what is being imposed on us in a way that's even more fundamental than capitalist realism, because the Soviet Union, an anti-capitalist society, still had the same technological realism baked into it. And what this does is now it's measurement, right? Everything, because ultimately, if you want to just sum it all up into one word, measurement. It's measurement. Obviously, measurement's real. For example, a captain of a ship needs to be able to measure distance to sail from one port to the other. But if that's all he does and doesn't develop this sort of like lay of the sea and, being able to read, have hunches and intuitions to navigate, he's not going to be a maximally good captain. He might be good enough, but he's not going to be a true capital C captain. But you can't measure that, right? You can't measure. Okay, so back to my feelings stream a couple of weeks ago. Qualia is the intersubjective experience that we all have. So for example, the sensation of touch of a surface, the taste of food, the aroma of something. How we process that is qualia. And it's actually prior to reason, right? Before we even reason, before we even have things to reason about, we have this sort of like sense of feeling our existence. Sort of what Descartes gets out, cogito ergo sum. But the idea being that we have to interact with other things, and that interaction is in part qualia. That can't be measured, and so materialists believe it doesn't exist, and that's why you have thought experiments like Mary's Room, for example. And I also mentioned this in an adjacent way when I was on Patrick Casey's show too. And it's frankly ridiculous. Of course that's knowledge. Of course qualia is real. Everybody there wasn't a word for it, not like in this technical philosophical sense, but prior to the age of the machine, everybody knew that these things existed. They were written about in poetry and literature and then put to music. And so we have to pretend that that's not real. And we all know it's real, but we have to pretend that it's not. And so you couple this with the nonsense of spontaneous order, that things will just, be. They just magically appear because that's just how we've decided, we have a model for rational actors in an economy. And, a precondition for that is spontaneous order. So it's just going to happen. Okay, so let's say we have a bunch of goods. Now, in this sense, I don't mean economic goods. I mean social goods or moral goods. That one can't be accounted for within the market and the cash nexus. That can't be accounted for within the machine and measurement. And in order to get resources, you have to play along with these forces in order to get food, clothes, and shelter. So you have an active interest in not recognizing these realities, just on a practical level, right? Now, you might actually still recognize them. You might even think that we need to go back to them. But you're not doing anything to make it possible. Those things that don't go accounted for are themselves they have to be cultivated, right? It's like if you have a garden and you want to grow vegetables in it, you have to cultivate it. It doesn't just happen on its own. On its own, you're just going to get weeds, right? You have to actually go in there and cultivate it. These things are cultivated. They're not the result of some price exchange. They're not the result of some industrial process. And yet no one's cultivating them because there's no money in it. So, suppose people could do it in their spare time, but they get caught up with surrogate activities, and so they don't do that. And they go chronically underproduced. And so what I'm arguing here is in a lot of people like us who see the problems, who want to see it addressed, are so deeply embedded mentally in this prison of, the cash nexus and measurement, price and measurement, that even though we see the need to restore the other half of life that is missing, we lack the ability to see the kinds of actions necessary to take to get there. Because it's going to take a long time and it's going to take serious, sustained effort to get there. And that means you're going to have a vision. Somebody is going to have to see how to do that. Because right now, nobody can see it. Nobody seems to see how to do it. They see that there's a need to do it, but nobody seems to see how to do it. So you first have to be able to think in terms that transcend the limit of this prison that has been superimposed on us. We grew up in it at birth, right? We don't know any different, at least not until we experience the real world and other things. Then we begin to question, and so maybe this isn't really what we're getting at. Maybe that's not really what we want. And so I think ultimately here what we're talking about is that these people are stuck in the prison. Right? If you have to, in Live Not by Lies, Rod Dreher talks about how people knew the Soviet propaganda was false, but they still spouted it. There's like a double thing, right? Orwell's double thing. They still had to say it in order to function in society. And he argued that, if you weren't careful, you would end up, basically just destroying your psyche because you're living a lie and you just kind of go crazy. Or you believe the lie and just go back into the matrix. Something very close to that is what's going on now. We have this double think, this group think, this things we have to believe in public in order to function, in order to operate, but actually are false. We might even know they're false. We might even go online and tell people that it's false, but you can't say it in the boardroom, right? So, but this is the problem. And it's the same kind of problem of somebody living in the Eastern Bloc. We have doublethink here too. It's not any different. It's just less, like Huxley said, right? You're going to use drugs and pharmacology and media to control people rather than bullets and bayonets because you can't sit on a bayonet, as he said. And it's harder to point the finger at whoever's doing it to you because it's really subtle, right? So how can we get people to see that they're in this prison and that, things that they have, or rather the things that they want to see restored, are not going to be restored unless some very radical things happen. So I mentioned earlier, friendship doesn't get produced. Well, you can't. And again, I'll just give you a brief recap. Aristotle says there's 3 levels: utility, pleasure, and love of the good. Right, and that the love of the good in the other person is the highest form of friendship. It includes the other 2 because a good man is both useful and pleasant. But the issue here is none of this. You can't put a price on this, right? We say this about our human relationships. They're priceless, right? It's true. They are. They're sui generis because it's just that person, right? They're not a fungible product that you can put on the assembly line and sell in a grocery store. So, but we don't have that, right? I mean, we have the word friend. We have people we call friends. But again, if we look at Aristotle's definition, nobody has friends. I mean, again, consume salt together. So eat it. I guess people eat out together. So maybe we have that. Living within walking distance of each other. We don't, unless you live in a city, most people don't have that. Most importantly, there's no private property amongst friends. We really don't have that in America right now. So there's no friends. And of course, that's the precondition for social existence. The polis begins with friendship. And so that's why American politics is falling apart, because again, we don't have the very preconditions for social political life, because we don't have friends, and we don't have friends because it can't be measured. And you can't put a price on it. They're priceless. And so the system that we have selects against them. And in fact, if you try to cultivate these traits, you're not going to get very far in life. The system will select against you. So we have the system selecting against these people because they can't be measured or put a price on. We also have people who don't know how to cultivate these traits. Like Aristotle has a study of virtue, ethics, and forming good habits. And we also have people that don't recognize the importance of it. And so they don't even mourn the loss of it. Everything's been defined down, right? And this is really the issue with measurement, right? The scientist says because he can measure something, he has described that thing in its totality, right? In philosophy, in Western philosophy, I think it's, maybe not beginning with Locke, but Locke is famous for saying this, that the secondary qualities of a thing, the things that we can discern with the senses, we can know are real. But what we can't know is the primary qualities or essential nature of the thing, right? This is where we get the bifurcation of Aristotle's four causes. So we still keep material and efficient causes, but we've gotten rid of formal and final causes, which, I mean, this is patently absurd. I mean, this distinction is an absurd distinction because, one, we do know the essential nature of things, and pretending that we don't is just dishonest. Because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to function in the world, right? If we didn't know the essential nature of things like predatory animals or adverse weather conditions, we'd die. But we do know. We do know. Furthermore, this is one of the things that people who have insight are able to tap into. They are able to see the true nature of the thing immediately. It's an immediate experience. There's no process of reasoning. It's just, it would be as if, and to use a physical analogy, I picked up an apple and I just have this immediate experience of the apple. I'm tasting it. I'm holding it. So I can feel it. I can smell it. I can eat it, right? It's an immediate experience. But like that, they have it of the essential character of a thing. Furthermore, if things don't have an essential character, then you can't even do empiricism, because what's constant, right? What are the constants that you can rely on that will allow you to make this narrow claim about a thing? Well, there isn't. and that's why we have all the problems we have with identity today. It's all downstream from this. But to the point, there is nothing more than what the scientist has measured. And so there you go. Once you do that, you just lose so much. This is why I think also this is why we have a strange situation of what I call the tradcon sore losers. There's like the tradcons who ostensibly have won. They have a career, they're married, they have kids, but they're not happy, and they spend all their time on social media berating other men for not having or doing what they're doing. And it's like, well, and then recently, one of these guys that I'm talking about, Michael Foster on Twitter, was saying that amongst millennials, so they're married, they have kids, right? The wives of some of the guys he knows, presumably leadership guys, because he's a leadership guy. He's probably not, chumming it up with like the bricklayer. So, their wives are cheating on them because they're not happy with the marriage. It's like, what they have is they have the substance of the thing, but not the essence, right? You have like a picture of like a family. And it's like, well, look, everybody's in the right spot in the picture. So I must have it, right? But you don't, because all you have is just this arrangement of things rather than the essence of the thing. And but that's just the problem all across the board. We have the substance of the thing, but not the essence of the thing. But that goes back to philosophy, because there's this bifurcation. There's this fiat. We can't know the essential nature of a thing, and this fiat that we've been dealing with at least since Locke is driving this wedge uh, between basically separating half of human existence and then saying it doesn't exist. And as in related fashion, one of the things that I pointed out in other conversations is the challenge we have is how to remystify the world, because the machine has unveiled everything. Well, the way you do that is you realize that nothing was unveiled. The essential nature of the things that we thought were unveiled and rendered vulgar wasn't touched, because they a priori said that didn't exist, but it did exist. It does exist. And so what you've done is you've defined down what everything is to this like bare bones measurement analysis. Nothing above that is real. So all you've done is you've just done a parlor trick. It's like, if you go along with this really idiotic assumption, we can do all these things. And all these things, of course, increase power. That's why they're doing it. So there was I think it was in the documentary, was it Occupied Cascadia? My friend Eric Jensen said that, science makes predictions, makes its claims of truth on its ability to make predictions through the application of force. He says, I could, if I have a hoop and I put a gun to your head and say, jump through the hoop or I'll shoot you, and then you do, and then I say, well, look, I predicted you jump through the hoop and you did. He's like, okay, I've made a prediction that came true because of the threat of the use of force. But is it true? I mean, and there's really not much of a chance we could ever be friends after this. So it's this parlor trick that we're just not going to see other things. And I think that's also why a lot of modern media sucks. I mean, yeah, there are bad actors. There are people that are intentionally trying to destroy things. But, as the millennials now start moving in to these positions, these are people that just don't have any experience with anything real. I mean, and so, they've really bought into this. Like, half the world doesn't exist, even though we see it every day. And so you're just going to be in a really bad spot when it comes to coming up with ideas, especially entertaining ideas for like film, right? You're missing half the picture. You've just unilaterally decided it doesn't exist. And so but also too with money, right? See what the commercial system and the industrial system have in common is everything is fungible, right? What's one of the preconditions for currency? It's fungible. Has to be, for all practical purposes, identical for any unit, just like a machine part. If you want to get a replacement part for your car, that replacement part better be, for all practical purposes, the same as the one you're replacing. So what this does is friends, spouses, communities, these are not fungible. These are not the same for all practical uses. But we've been conditioned to think they are, because we have to engage in society, and society forces us to do that, because the people that have the economic resources that give us what we need to live force us to do this. It's a kind of totalitarian mind control. Well, we won't feed you or clothe you unless you drive a wedge through half your brain and believe insane nonsense, because, we have all the food, I guess. It's ridiculous. It's insane. I mean, you can't say this stuff in a boardroom, right? So, and what Rod Dreher was concerned about is you can't live this lie and not have it bleed into your private life, right? You might even know it's not true, but you've been so habituated to act like it's true that you treat people in your private life just like that, which actually prevents you from building the kinds of social relationships and communities necessary to actually restore what was lost that we all agree we need to go back to. And this is something that's so subtle that, again, I'm talking about people that I think are acting in good faith and really do want these things. They don't even know they're doing it. They don't even know they're doing it. They don't even know they're in the prison. And so it's really challenging. And it's really challenging to figure out how to translate this to people. People aren't fungible. They have to. They're sui generis. They're unique into themselves, right? And so we need to have a radically different understanding of social existence. And in the past, in order to get the economic goods of life, this is exactly how you had to think. You had to think exactly like this. That's why you had the statement, caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? That's why you had people looking for men of good character, right? Because if you want to run sort of enterprise or some sort of social or political operation, you can't be in all places at once. You're going to have people that you can trust to do things for you. And so instead of doing that now, we just have technicians who control machines because machines are always working. So there was this sort of built-in discipline to engage in the economy in the past, before the machine, to think this way. But that's gone now. Now what we have to do is we have to pretend that's not real. So the first thing is coming to grips with these realities, right? Alcoholics Anonymous, you first have to admit there's a problem. Can't get anywhere if you don't admit there's a problem. And okay, so the nature of the problem, right? We have to look at the nature of the problem. And that's what we've been discussing tonight. Now, what do you do next? Well, the next thing you have to do, this is going to be the really, really hard part, because I can't seem to get people to stop indulging in their insane surrogate activities. Stop. Just stop. Stop with the surrogate activities and then take stock of how much time you have in the week. Once you've carved out hours in the week that you're not filling with surrogate activities, figure out how you can see, we're conditioned to act like half the world doesn't exist because of the reign of quantity. You have to start figuring out how you can overcome that in your own time, because no one's going to do it for you, at least not yet. There's no institution that you can go to that's like, hey, give me it's not like the army where you can sign up and they'll train you in boot camp and then you're ready to go, right? There's nothing like that for this. So people are going to have to start doing it on their own first before there's any organization that does it for the rest of people. So once you have that time carved out, you have to think, okay, well, how am I treating people and social relationships in this way? How am I interacting with people under the veil of illusion that this prison has given me? And then once you identify those ways, find ways to stop. And then, proactively do other things that will properly align you back to this, so that we can actually achieve and restore what was lost by changing the way we act, which first is changing the way we think. And part of the problem is that many people on the right it's like the third chapter of The Machine Stops, right? They look at history and they're reading it and they're very erudite, right? There's a lot of history autists in our sphere, but they have this understanding that history as it happened in the machine, right? They're so lost in the sauce because they're terminally online. They don't understand that their reading of history, well, factually, technically, correct in many ways, right, is wrong in the sense that they're reading it through this filter already. They're so in it, the way they read it, their mind is already in this prison. So they're reading it that way. But then also the goal of the machine is that you read history as if it occurred in the machine. And they're doing that too, which makes it difficult for them to draw the correct lessons from history, specifically applying it to their own lives. And so that's a huge problem. that will take a long time to solve. And this problem is again, it goes back to philosophy, the idea that we do not know the essential nature of things. That's just the axiom of the Enlightenment. It's just a fiat, and it's stupid. It's stupid. Why? It's not true. It's never been proved. It's just an assumption. It's a fiat. And of course, why was it asserted? Why was it so successful? Because if you believe that way, you can reduce. The world is complex, right? The people that want power want to create this hyper-normalized reality where it's simple and streamlined, and they can control all the inputs and outputs in just such a way that they are the ones in control. They want to reduce the indeterminacy of things. And, a good example is in Dune, right? So in Dune, the Bene Gesserit don't want their sisters to love the men that they are having children with. They're just there to be vehicle surrogates in order to get the Kwisatz Haderach. It's just a purely transactional thing, right? Because you can't account for love. That's the thing, right? If you want to have this multi-millennia process of breeding the Superman, you don't want these things that you can't calculate, you can't measure, you can't account for. And so they failed, of course, right? Because Jessica has a son with Leto. And so that's Paul. But the point is, though, why did they do that? Well, they wanted to have something predictable. And, that's why friendship is gone. Because, again, it's the basis of the polis. It's how you organize social life. And it can't be accounted for, right? Men who love something will sacrifice everything for that thing, right? And so from one point of view, they might be engaged in a last stand. And it's like, why are you doing this, right? We can't. But on the other hand, from the point of view of the men making the sacrifice, that's the only course of action possible. And so for people that want to control everything, that gets in the way. It's even before the fact that these men might organize against you, which is another concern. It's just not predictable, right? It's that element of love that the Bene Gesserit wanted to get rid of, but couldn't. And so to sort of go back to all of this, there are people on the right and who see that certain things are missing, that we used to take for granted. Broadly would just call it tradition, which includes things like friends, family, community, religious life, all that stuff. It's just gone. And they know it's bad and they want to reverse that somehow. The problem is they're not at all reversing it. Things are just getting worse and worse and worse. They're just getting pulled along by the nose. Partly they're getting pulled along by the nose because in order to interface with the system to get resources, they have to tell themselves that half the world doesn't exist, even if they know it's not true. And to be successful, you have to believe that a lot. And so they voluntarily put themselves in this position where they can be pulled along by the meta of the system because the machine is constantly moving to new metas. Liquid modernity, future shock, all that stuff. You put yourself on the escalator, guy. That's why you're getting pulled along. It's not rocket science. But they don't want to get off the escalator. So, because they'll lose a lot of money and life's going to get hard. But it doesn't matter because, are going into a collapse, so it's going to get hard anyhow. So, get used to it. Better get ahead of it now while you can. And what I'm trying to do is help these people see that, look, we're all in agreement on these substantial social goods. We're not producing them. We're not producing them because the very economic, technical structure, the very infrastructure that governs this country selects against it, making it impossible if you do it within the confines of the system. Now, obviously, going back to my discussion with Patrick Casey, if you have like a pocket where you don't have to interface with this, I talked about the idea that, we have communities which are sort of hermetically sealed from the system. We have elite men who can interface with the system because you still have to, but they do it so that the rest of the people inside don't have to. Kind of like a soldier goes to fight a war so that the people back home don't have to. There, we have to build an entirely different economic system, an entirely different set of infrastructure, an entirely different set of social norms that select for these things that we want. That is going to be a prodigiously difficult task because there's no money in it. You're going to have dedicated donors that view this as a goal, a good goal in itself, that just pay for it. You won't be getting your annual dividends like you would if you invested in some venture capital. But what you would get in the long run is all of these things back. And you would get not just the form of a thing, but the substance of a thing. And that's the only way forward. So let's see what we have in the chat. We have GF, mutant number 12. Hello. Mutant number 12. Just trust the system, man. Yeah. Sigil Reborn. Hello. Cidraboard, praise your wrong. We could have exponential growth forever. GDP always grows at 2% per year. Well, it just does, okay? Yeah, it's so true. So true. Cidraborn, of course, I'm just kidding. I think you're right on. Yeah. Let's see. Connor Rafferty, National Populist. The virtue of generosity is a potential way out of this impasse. Yeah, it is. One of the things you find in the Bible again and again and again is that you are, as Christ said, what you measure out will be measured out to you. So if you want kindness, then you have to be kind to other people. Now, obviously, you could still be a jerk and you might just, run across a saint one day who's nice to you even though you don't deserve it. But somebody has to break the cycle, right? The problem is we have this cycle of self-destructive bad behavior that it's going to take a tremendous amount of effort to break because you have to change your course. You have to change your direction. But you just have to do it. Somebody has to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. Connor Rafferty, National Populist. Caring for a friend, for example. Amen. 3 levels of friend. Aristotle. There we go. 3 levels of friend. Good. Yep. I had a hard time without private. I have a hard time without private property. I don't think. Well, no, it's not. It's not that it goes away, Minoan. It's that, to put it another way, a friend never trespasses. Because by the nature of the relationship, trespass is impossible. Because that's as much. It's considered tacitly as much his as yours. So a friend can't trespass. That's sort of what we're getting at here. Connor Rafferty, National Populist. No friendship, no family equals no society. Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Connor Rafferty, National Populist. Yes, but scientist doesn't necessarily claim that measurement is all. That's the scientism guy. Well, yeah, but that's the point. They're the ones that run everything. So that's the problem. Let's see. Chandler Holmes, this is good stuff. Thanks, POF. Thank you. Connor Rafferty, National Populist, better than usual. Thank you. Let's see. And yeah, there's a lot of community engagement today. This is great. TB9K, I think people assume the parts are more real than the whole. Communities are made of people, so communities aren't real. The body is made of atoms, so bodies aren't real. Ooh, yeah, that's really true. It's this kind of like atomism, right? That we believe about nature has like bled into everything else, leading to the hyper-individualism. There's no forest. There's just trees, my dude. There's just trees. There's no forest. You're crazy. But that's the American right. There's no forest, guys. Just trees. Okay. There we go. Mutant 12. Private property is boomer truth. Yeah. GF. There is a concept in mathematics called restriction of a domain where you take out certain parts of a group, rendering them non-existing so as to simplify graphs or calculations. Might sound autistic, but kind of looks like a way to obfuscate things if used with power in real life. There you go. There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, such an exercise might be useful in a purely intellectual sense, but you can't actually reify this. You can't. It's just not, it won't work. Well, everyone, that's all I got for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.